If you were young and black in Durham in the late 1960s and 70s, you probably recognized this music and these faces. We'll talk about the music, the artists, and the social culture that defined Bull City Soul next on Black Issues Forum.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Issues Forum. I'm Deborah Holt Noel. The 1960s and 70s, even through the early part of the 80s, were marked by a distinctive musical sound called soul. Artist names like Aretha Franklin, James Brown, and Sam and Dave became famous on the national scene. But right in Durham, North Carolina, there was a soul music revolution that generated an impressive volume of music and artists and was also very popular. There's currently a new effort to recollect, preserve, and celebrate that music and its history, and it's called the Bull City Soul Revival. Today we'll find out more about it with our panel of guests who are all involved with the project. I'd like to introduce a woman who knows music well, as she has performed with greats like Martha and the Vandellas and the Platters. Jason McMillian, recording artist, producer, author, and music coordinator for the Bull City Soul Revival. Also, we have with us Dr. Mark Anthony Neal, professor of Black popular culture in the Department of African and African American Studies at Duke University. Dr. Joshua Clark Davis, a curator for the Soul Souvenirs exhibit, who will also be working as a Thompson Fellow at Duke University and teaching a class on the history of Durham starting in the fall. And we are very honored to have with us an original soul music performer from Durham who performed with the Mighty Crusaders, the legendary Johnny White. What a pleasure it is to have all of you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do want to start with you, Jason, though. Tell us, what is the Bull City Soul Music Revival?
The Bull City Soul Revival originated because there's been various people over the past 10 years that have actually been working on projects because related to this subject, because they're passionate about black music, soul music. And so we all came together. And I'm sure that you'll hear about how that happened. But we all came together, educators, musicians, anyone who was of interest in the community, interested in this project. So we came together to figure out how could we pay tribute to these legends. Should we have a festival? How long will it last? So we hammered things out, we talked about it, and we decided that the educational aspect of it was very important because a lot of young people weren't familiar with these groups and the accomplishments they had made. So we decided to have an educational component, and then basically the finale would be a concert.
Which is going to be fabulous, and that's going to be at the end of April. Is that
April 27th?
Yes, at the Hayti Heritage Center,
Right.
Which brings us to the importance of that particular part of Durham, Hayti. And Joshua, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about some of the elements within Durham culture that help to make this music thrive.
Yeah, well, the way I got involved with the Bull City Soul Revival, kind of my background is that I'd done research and written on the history of black-owned record stores in the South, especially in North Carolina. And one of the record stores that came up in my research was Snoopy's, which was very close to Pettigrew Street. It had a run in the 70s as kind of a meeting place. It was run by a former singer named Jimmy Liggins, and he promoted bands, young performers in that store in addition to selling records. Another record store, which was actually white-owned but had a large selection of R&B and soul music, was the Record Bar, which was also downtown. But one of the things we'll be talking about in the exhibit is the role that these physical places served as sites of congregation for musicians and for fans and for consumers. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to dig into in this exhibit.
And I heard you over there amening, Mark. Tell us a little bit about how you would define soul music as distinguished from, say, R&B.
So soul music is quintessentially American music, right? It's the soundtrack to the civil rights era. It's the soundtrack of black aspiration. And what was so important about soul music, if you look at rhythm and blues that comes before it as a popular form, it was really interested in taking those kind of rhythm and blues sensibilities and bringing it in conversation with the black church. So when you think of those early days of Ray Charles as kind of really one of the innovators of the form, he was very conscious to take these kind of melodies and chords that he heard in the church and putting them in a secular context. You know, what I like to describe soul music is this kind of wedding of the black spiritual world and the black secular world. So it was a music that on the one hand was capable of allowing people to be able to sustain themselves, to enjoy themselves, but it was also a music that, like the spiritual traditions, had the capacity to name evil in the world. And so it was a very natural fit for the civil rights movement, right? It became a soundtrack of a generation of folks trying to talk about why integration was important, talk about why black power was important, to name racial evil in the world.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that impact, but we have been talking about the music, and by now I'm sure that our viewers are curious as to how some of this music sounds. Let's just take a really quick listen, and then we'll be right back.
I must admit, my chances kinda slim. I must admit, my future's looking dim. You look so good, standing there, physically healthy and trim.
Healthy and trim, Mr. White.
Yes.
That was the young Johnny White, and we have him right here in our studio right now. And you actually were in Durham. You were in the midst of the scene. You were performing the music. Describe for us, in terms of a place that some folks from Durham might recognize, the Stallion Club, what the scene was like. What was the Stallion Club, first of all? And what was that music scene like during that time?
The Stallion Club was called the showplace of the South. All of the national artists who were on tour from coming from north, going down to Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, they all stopped at the Stallion Club. So all of the local talent who had an opportunity to perform there, we were really honored because it was supported heavily by the Durham community and a lot of the outlying cities. So it was a place where everybody gathered on Saturday night to have a good time.
All right. And this music, it seems as though it didn't necessarily reach that national prominence, but it was very hot here in the region. What helped contribute to the volume of music that came out of this area, and the sound as well?
I think that the one primary factor was that we had a distinctive sound. Unlike Motown, they were known for having groups, and in this area we were known to have the big band sound with horns, with a person out front, and then there were 2 or 3 people in some other groups that were out front, and so we had a distinctive sound that people could recognize was from the Durham area. And then we had several people who were in school with me who migrated to New York and who became quite famous for being band directors and band leaders of shows that were developed in New York.
Mark Anthony, I want to ask you kind of the same question, just kind of expand some more on the elements that were in Durham, including, you know, like Johnny said, the educational institutions, but also what was happening in terms of African Americans and entrepreneurship and business that might have supported
you know,
this?
there are a few things. One, you know, black music has always been a regional music. You know, everybody created music that reflected their spaces. So we talk about a Motown sound, we talk about a Shy sound in terms of Chicago, Philadelphia doo-wop tradition. We could talk about Stax and what was happening in Memphis. So it'd be natural that someplace like Durham, the Triangle region, would have their own kind of flavor put on soul music. We don't have a sense of a national music culture really until the 1970s and something like Soul Train. And Don Cornelius was very good about, you know, making sure that he gave prominence to regional dance styles, making sure that he gave prominence to regional groups. I mean, that's why the modulations show up on Soul Train, and it gives them now a kind of national recognition that they didn't have before. So those elements were important, and there was an entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, that's, you know, that's the story of folks like Don Roby and Peacock Records. I mean, that's the story of Motown and Berry Gordy, that these folks post-World War II, it was kind of a hustler sensibility, that except the hustle was going to be the recording industry, right? And this was going to, we were going to create business out of this. And again, if you look at the example of someone like Don Cornelius, I mean, that's kind of the brightest light in that regard. The idea of independent black media, independent black companies, independent promotional companies, you know, all that stuff was self-contained, you know, within these kind of regional musical cultures.
And Joshua, we also had at that time, as Mark Anthony was talking about, this entrepreneurial element and the black-owned record stores in Durham. Were these places only where African-American youth would gather, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think just talking to Ms. McMillian before the interview today, she mentioned that a colleague of ours had remembered the Record Bar, which actually was a white-owned store, but it was a store that had a huge following among African-American customers. But it was known as one of the few places in towns that young blacks and whites mixed. And I think another example, just to follow up on Mr. White's mention of the Stallion Club. The Stallion Club, we were talking about this today, was actually bombed in 1970, and they never figured out who bombed it, but one of the supposed motives was that it had become a known place for whites and blacks to intermingle. A night spot also, of course. And so in the exhibit that we're doing, we call these places soul spots. They're the places where the music flourished, and yeah, people did gather there.
Do you see some parallels for today? We talked about hustling the music and the music actually being a conduit for conversation and in order to mend race relations. Is that conversation happening now? Is that support for regional music happening now? I'm going to ask you first, Jason.
Well, one of the things that were happening, I think that there was a very unique relationship in Durham's Hayti community between whites and blacks. And it was the music, the lyrics to the music that helped a lot of whites understand us more, you know, emotionally, our culture, understand our culture, how we interacted with each other. And so it was, the music was very important. And they recognize that today because the beach music market has made a fortune off of that same music, which is what I hope that we can revive it. I hope that what we're doing can revive that music. I really do.
And in the same way, Mark Anthony, are we taking full advantage of the opportunity to use music in the same way today?
I think there are elements of that. I think hip hop, you know, for all the criticism of it from a musical production standpoint, it's been very good in terms of being able to reach back into the past and sample artists and make them relevant. I co-teach a class with Ninth Wonder at Duke called Sampling Soul, and the whole class is really about, here you have soul music is like this repository historical repository for Black America, and you have hip hop artists who are consciously in conversation with that music. And this music, in some ways, it's relevant to all of us, because we're fans of the music. But for a lot of these kids who've never had access to it, who only think of it as their parents' music or their grandparents' music, hip hop has allowed for this music to be something that's very vital to them and important to them. And they can hear it in ways that they might not have been able to hear it as their parents are telling them, this is a great song that you need to listen to.
So Johnny, I know that you've actually, in your current career, you continue to perform, and I saw you had to perform some modern day music as well. What are your thoughts on today's young artists and their use and taking advantage of music as a way to bridge cultural gaps?
I think one thing that's so crucial is that the current artists need to develop more discipline and allow themselves to be more open to conversation and dialogue with other individuals who may not understand where they're coming from. You have a lot of artists who, for the most part, write their own lyrics. And I think those lyrics are used to bridge some of the gaps that we're currently talking about.
And those conversations that this project is intended to help initiate and help people engage in, are there particular events or any kind of direct effort to make sure that this isn't just a music concert or a time to celebrate the music, but an opportunity to really learn about the history and have those mending types of conversations, Jason?
Well, we're talking about having some workshops where, because my concern about this whole new generation of music is no one is learning how to play an instrument anymore because the technology has replaced it. So I'm very concerned about that. I think that's a very important part of development, of a child's development too. So we're talking about having some workshops where they can actually learn how to play instruments, learn how to put songs together, learn how to put shows together, all of the things that they would need. And I'm sure that now the shows that they do, I haven't been to a hip hop show, but once or twice. But I would just like to see them learn from what has been done, what has worked, and take it now and apply it.
I think additionally, if I might add this, we need to also focus with our younger generation of musicians the aspect of taking care of business. A lot of them don't understand that even with all the writing and arranging, and as she said, in learning how to play their instruments, they don't know how to take care of business. Taking care of business is one of the most crucial parts of the developmental process.
It seems like this is something that's plagued musicians from the time, and particularly African-American musicians, from the time they began to make music. It's, actually owning your own material. How did you all know to do that? And were you able to retain your ownership rights over the material you were creating?
No, the song was, Why Can't We Live Together? I think he was the one that gave it away because he wanted to be in music. And a lot of people did that. They just wanted it so bad. And I tell you, I went through that where when they talked to me about contracts, and they had this way of making it sound so, wow, I'm going to make you a star. I want to be a star, I don't care if I pay my rent or,
That they were just kind of, I guess, feeding on your passion.
Oh,
and
yes.
You didn't. But that has continued throughout the decades where musicians and young artists are concerned. So I guess after you learn the hard lesson, then you try to pass it on. But some folks have to learn it the hard way. Now, both Jason McMillian and Johnny White have continued their passion for this music professionally. And Jason, through a group called Reese,
It's Rise.
Rise, thank you. And it was put together by documentary filmmaker Victor Stone, who incidentally is also producing the Bull City Soul Revival documentary, and also Johnny through his group Johnny and the Elite Band. And these two entertainers have still got it. Talent never dies, true talent doesn't, and they are still entertaining audiences with their soul music and more. So let's take a look.
Wash your face and hang. Rid me of the problem. Do all that. Come fly with me. Let's float down to Peru. In Llama Land, there's a one-man band. He'll toot his flute for you.
Johnny White and the Elite Band stir up excitement, fun, and enthusiasm unmatched by none.
She's a bad amateur, just as fine as she can be.
You all don't see, but they are in here dancing in their seats, and so am I. So the concert that's coming up is going to be fantastic. We do have information on the upcoming events around the Bull City Soul Revival, and that includes the schedule Thursday, April 12th at 7 p.m. There's a lecture by Dr. Bruce Bridges at the Stanford L. Warren Branch Library. Thursday, April 19th at 7 p.m., the Soul Souvenirs exhibit opening at the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham. On Friday, April 27th at 7 p.m., the Bull City Soul Revival concert will be at the Hayti Heritage Center. And if you want to know more details, go online to durhamcountylibrary.org/bcsr.php. Now, Joshua, we might have to give you the last word on this, but tell us a little bit about that exhibit opening.
Yeah, so we call the exhibit Soul Souvenirs, Musical Memories of Durham in the 1960s and 1970s. And more than anything, we just want to recover this history of soul music in Durham in the 1960s and 1970s. By our count, there were at least 40 groups in the area. I'm sure it's more. There were upwards of 30 singles that were put out, whole albums. And what we're trying to do with this exhibit is talk about the performers, talk about Johnny White, talk about Modulations, NCCU, Blue Steam, Darachi, the Communicators, Black Experience Band, groups like that, but also tell a larger story about Durham and especially Durham's African American community in the 60s and 70s, because we're linking this music to things like the local school system, churches, small businesses, even the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and talking about how Bull City Soul was a window into all of these things that were going on in Durham and especially Durham's African American community. So at the opening, we're going to have a talk with former musicians, current musicians also, but guys who were doing stuff in the 60s and 70s. And so, yeah, Thursday, April 19th, 7 p.m. at Hayti Heritage Center, hoping people will show up. And yeah.
Terrific. And I'd like to also remind our viewers that if you have information about any of these groups, the music, photographs, images, Joshua and the entire project are still collecting information. They need this to hold on to the history. And Dr. Neal, I just want to ask you, as we reflect on this music and look to the future of where hip hop is taking us and the roots of this music, how do we make sure in a new way, if necessary, that this music is used to build bridges and to have conversations around race? How can we use that right now?
You know, if you're a parent, you make sure that you expose your children to it. My two daughters, 9 and 13, they've been listening to Motown backbeat since they were infants. Being able to have spaces at places like North Carolina Central and UNC at Duke to be able to teach classes where kids, have to be able to listen to the stuff. I'm co-teaching a class on Motown now with Anthony Kelly, and the students are trying to make their own emulations of Motown, of the Motown beat, trying to recapture that sound. So we really have to think of this music as kind of building blocks. That connects us not only to American history, but obviously very specific aspects of African American history. It's a music that's timeless, right? And that's part of the selling point of it. That's why the Bull City Soul Revival is what it is, because it's music that's timeless, and everybody loves the good feelings and the possibilities that we've gotten from it.
Johnny, how does it feel to have this attention placed on this music as a treasure?
It's great. Been in the business a long time, and I think because of the support that we've gotten from NCCU and other local universities and the Durham community. We cannot leave out the Durham community, because when we were performing at the Stallion Club and some of the other local clubs in the area, we would not be who we are had it not been for the Durham community supporting us.
So it takes everyone supporting one another. And I'd like to thank Jason McMillian, Dr. Mark Anthony Neal, Dr. Joshua Clark Davis, and Johnny White for coming out and sharing their knowledge and their stories and their experience. For more information about today's program, visit us online at unctv.org/BIF. You'll find links to email us your comments and join us as fans of BIF on Facebook, or you can call us on the BIF line at 919-549-7167. Be sure to meet us right back here each Sunday afternoon at 4:30. For Black Issues Forum, I'm Deborah Holt Noel. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.